Okay, we are live.
Yes, sir. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen. Maybe what we can do is while he is presenting, we can turn off our videos so that we can reduce uh, bandwidth of things. But let Manoranjan keep his video.
Yes, sir.
And once everything is over, I would like everybody to switch on their videos and have a discussion. All right, off you go, Manoranjan.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Manoranjan from a fourth year dual degree student. So today we are going to discuss my research topic on hydrodynamic object detection using neural networks. So today the topics that we are going to discuss and the works are mostly inspired from what you are seeing now, which is nothing but the lateral line system in fishes. So what is lateral line system usually means? What is lateral line system means? So this part, the red line that you see in this picture, is actually a feature in fishes by which they can actually sense their surrounding without having the need to see. So it's interesting, right? So they don't have to see and still they can get a sense of their surrounding. So how does they do this? So they have a sensory hair, or they call it neuromast. Similarly, there is a tubular neuromast as well, by which they can sense the pressure and velocity of the fluid around them, and by that they get a way of sensing the surrounding. So how does this help, you may ask? So this picture will give us a better understanding of what how they are using it. So one example you see here is, assume this as a big fish, say a shark. So it will have a lateral line along this. So it's you can assume that as a sensor that is present in a sensor that is present in the shark. So when it's trying to hunt and there is a small fish which is going behind it, then by the lateral lines, it actually can sense where that prey is with respect to it, and then it can go and attack them. Another use case of this lateral line system is widely found in deep cave fishes, which mean when the fishes in deep oceans, I mean, there will be no light in deep oceans, right? So light cannot pass in deep ocean, but still fishes and other organisms live there. So how do they live? So they have this feature again, which they can use it to get a sense of the surrounding around them, and they don't have the need to see, and still they can dodge the obstacles around them, and they can go to its prey, etc. So this lateral line system of fishes is what we are basically trying to mimic, and we'll be seeing how we are trying to do that as we progress. So before that, we are going to see the different works in this domain, and actually this was the first paper that I have read as well. So this is it's called as the hydrodynamic object identification with artificial neural models, and it came up in 2019. So it is a relatively recent research paper, and you can have a sense of how people are trying to experiment in this domain. So this is a very beautiful paper, and it actually gave me an idea of what the research problem was. And so what they are trying to do is they are trying to build an artificial neural network to find the shape of the obstacle, and also to determine the flow in a flow using potential theories. So they can so basically they will be assuming whether the flow has source or sink and doublet, and based on that they will be collecting the data, and they will be training it to predict an obstacle shape. And so the source or sink and doublet is they will also be trying to predict using an artificial neural network that they have separately built for it. And so, how do you basically predict a shape? So, if you are familiar with image processing and convolutional neural network, you must have come across this topic. So, we'll be trying to put the image into convolutional neural networks, and we'll be trying to obtain a feature vector that tries to represent the image, right? So what we will be doing here is something similar, but here we'll be trying to represent a shape with a feature vector. So those shape descriptors of that particular object is obtained through conformal mapping, and we'll be discussing about these methods and more on the three-dimensional aspect as we go further into the presentation. And note that this research paper is focusing upon 2D flow and 2D obstacles. So all their works are in 2D. So these are the some of the pictures that was present in the research paper, and so this picture that you see here actually represents the domain under consideration, and this is the shape of that object that we actually want to predict. And this grid that you see here are nothing but an array of sensors. So you can consider it as the lateral lines, artificial lateral line systems, and this will be similar to the lateral line systems found in fishes. So this system sensors will actually be used to get the velocities and pressure points, which that was changed due to the movement of this object. So once this object moves, the sensors will be present around the square boxes that you see here. It can be anywhere. So depending upon the distance from the sensor array, how much we can predict that object also depends upon that. So then moving on. So these were this picture you can see some of the results, and so the shape we have to predict was this object, and as you can see the result, they were able to predict the shape very accurately.
Manoranjan,
Yes, sir.
quick question. Was the object moving or was there a flow past the object?
Yeah, in this case there is a flow past that object.
The object itself is not moving, right?
Yeah, the object itself is not moving.
All right.
So in this case, the object is not moving, but there is a flow around that object, and depending upon how the flow changes, we can get the velocity and pressure points in this sensor, and we can try to predict that object. Yeah. So the next research paper that was again very interesting was this called as shape classification using hydrodynamic detection via a sparse large scale 2D sensitive artificial lateral line, which came up in 2020. So this was here in this case, they have actually built a artificial lateral line, and they try to predict and they try to classify different objects using uh, using the system. So they call the method that they are using as hydrodynamic imaging, and so what they did was they used 5 different objects, and they made it to move across the sensor systems. So it will be similar to this sensor array. I can show you that picture as well. So I have this. So these are the sensors that they are using. So they have placed sensors spaced across some distance, and they will make the object move across these sensors. So what will happen is, based upon, again they will be trying to predict velocity and pressure, velocity here. So in this case, but the difference from the previous paper was they will be trying to analyze the temporal velocity sample, which means based how the velocity varies with time instead of the spatial velocity samples. So so when the object is moving, there will be a good peak when the object is near the sensor. Similarly, when as the object traverses through, the sense how the sensor detects the velocity points will vary, and they'll be trying to analyze those signatures, and they'll be trying to predict the they'll not predict the shape here, they'll be trying to classify the object. So they have took 5 predefined objects. So these are the shapes of 5 objects, And as you can see, as the object is moving, these are just, I mean, they will be doing it multiple times across the sensor system. So depending upon that, you can actually get different temporal signatures, and these signatures they'll be trying to analyze it and come up with a shape classification system here. So what they are trying to do in this case is actually try to classify the shape across based on the signatures they have received. So they will be using something called as extreme learning machine neural network, which is nothing but it will have a single input layer, single hidden layer, and an output layer. So they claim that it is faster, and this serves their purpose. So far we have been seeing upon the works which were really close to what we are going to do, what my project is upon. And this, but you must have seen that so one of the research paper will be trying to work with 2D objects, and the other is classification. But what I wanted to do was, we want to reconstruct the uh, shape of that object predicted, and it has to be in 3D. So whatever works have been done before was in 2D. So we have to come up with some way of trying to reconstruct the 3D object. So as I was discussing before, we have to actually represent the 3D object with a shape descriptor. That means you have to, like the image processing that I have talked about, you have to represent that overall shape by a feature vector kind of sort. So doing that in 3D is actually a bit complicated. So there was another research paper which was published in 2004, which actually is upon this topic, but for a different use case. It's called as genus zero surface conformal mapping, and its application to brain surface mapping. So as you can see, it's basically used in the application of cortical surface matching problem in brain, and they will be trying to see how close two brain surfaces are mapping. I mean, how two surfaces of the brain are close to each other. So what we will be trying, and what this is again a very beautiful paper, and what we are trying to do, what I have done the progress, most of the works come from this research paper. And so what we will be trying to achieve is, uh, we'll be trying to convert that 3D object based upon the techniques that they have followed in this paper to obtain the shape descriptors. So what we'll be discussing about those techniques when I'm discussing, when I'm going through the progress so far in my work. So I'll be presenting the results briefly here. So what they'll be trying to achieve is, they'll be trying to find a unique mapping between two genus zero surfaces by minimizing the harmonic energy. So so genus zero surfaces means the surface doesn't, I mean the 3D object doesn't have any holes. So that's it. It doesn't mean much. And so the two genus zero surfaces that they are talking about here is, one, the object, which is in this case is the brain, and the other surface is actually the sphere. So what we'll be trying to achieve basically is, we'll be trying to map the 3D object onto a unit sphere. So that's our final goal. And based upon that mapping later, we'll be trying to compute the shape descriptors from that. And there are ways which we can do that. So I'll be discussing upon that as well. So yeah, so these are the results that they have shown in the paper. So this is the brain surface, and as you can see, they will be mapping it onto a sphere. So you can see how the variations in the surface are captured here. And this object that I've put actually means that when, say there are two lines which are intersecting at an angle on the surface of the object, those two, whatever the angle is, that will be preserved in this mapping as well. So you can get an idea of how the shape is actually being shape properties are being preserved in the mapping. So we'll use that to and try to obtain the shape descriptors. So, as we have discussed about three major research papers that I've came across, and we'll be discussing some more as well, uh, based upon the what we want to do, what I wanted to do. So, before moving on, we'll look at what is the aim of the current project that I'm doing. So, I'm actually trying to determine the shape, size, and position of the object based on the flow data measured from a sensor array. And we'll be using a artificial neural network to relate the flow and the shape descriptors. And the shape descriptors for the object is to be defined based on the conformal mapping techniques that we have just looked at on the previous paper. And we'll be using the analytical results based on the potential theory to determine flow values and actually use training our neural networks where we are trying to relate the flow and the shape descriptors. So I hope like how, you can get an idea of how we are trying to use readings on based on the previous works and trying to use it in our project. So I've more uh, in a flow where I'm working. So so the overall process can be highlighted in these 4 points. So we'll be finding a unique harmonic map onto a sphere for different 3D objects, in this case underwater and ocean vehicles, and we'll be computing the shape descriptors from the harmonic map to represent the shape of the object. And once these two topics are done, we'll be having a way to represent a 3D object with the shape descriptor. So after this, the rest all process may involve building an artificial neural network, which can take in the velocity or pressure points around an obstacle and predict the shape descriptors. So, and the next final and as a conclusion, we'll be using those shape descriptors to reconstruct the 3D object. So this is actually like reconstruction of the 3D object is also tested now, and once we have the shape descriptors, we can reconstruct a 3D object. So this the point that I've highlighted in green is actually whatever I've completed till now. So I was able to complete this part of computing the harmonic map for 3D objects to a good level, and this part which is computing the shape descriptors from the harmonic map is what I'm currently doing. And this part is particularly very challenging, and I'll be discussing upon that in the next few uh, slides. So now I'll be discussing about how we are how we are doing harmonic map of a 3D object. So these 3D objects, so this is an example of a submarine. So as by 3D object, we are looking at only the surface points of the 3D objects, and these 3D objects can be represented by these panels. As you can see in this case, triangular panels are being used to represent the surface of the 3D object. And as I've discussed before, genus 0 means there will be no hole. And this object, this submarine that you see, doesn't have any holes, and it is a fully closed figure. So say if there is a cut in this back part and there is a hole here, then it doesn't mean genus 0 surface, and whatever algorithm that we have computed now may not work for genus 0 surface. I mean, which are surfaces other than genus 0. So as for computing the harmonic map itself, the paper that we saw before suggests two steps. So one is they call it as toward map, and the next part that toward map to compute the harmonic map. So first we'll be looking at how we are computing the toward map first. So the overall algorithm can be put it in this ways. So we'll be giving an input as a 3D object, and we'll be giving a step length, which in this case is by how much the step length will give a sense of how much we want to update. So this is basically an iterative method. So when we are trying to update the mapping, we'll be doing it slowly and we'll be changing it slowly. So this step length will give an idea of that. So then this energy difference threshold will tell us when to stop this iterative procedure. And at the end of all this process, we'll be getting a Tewart map here. So for computing the Tewart map itself, we should start with another map called as Gauss map, which is nothing but we have to compute the normals of all the vertices, and that will represent the Gauss map. So what we do with the Gauss map is, since I have told this is an iterative procedure, we initialize that with the Tewart map, and then we go on with that procedure. So I'll be talking about this Gauss map in the next slide as well. And so this energy difference threshold, so for knowing when to stop, we'll be introducing introducing a term called Tewart energy. I'll be touching upon what is Tewart energy as well. So what is Gauss map? So in this slide, we are going to discuss about how we are computing the Gauss map. So it will be a bit involved in for the next few slides, but this may help to understand what we are actually doing in the problem. So what we are trying to find vertex normal at all the vertices. So these I've told before that these surfaces are represented by triangular panels, and these triangular panels will have, each triangular panel will have 3 vertices. So what we do is we try to compute the normal at each of the vertex. So this can be done, how this can be done is, for each panel that you see here, we can compute the normal of that panel. And for example, if you take this vertex, then you can then you can average out all the normal of the panels to represent the vertex normal of this particular panel. So this was actually what was suggested in the paper that we looked at as well. But what was observed was there were a lot of overlaps of the panels when this Gauss map was computed. So it was actually expected, but the overlap should actually be removed by our harmonic and Tewart mapping algorithm after that Gauss map. But since there were a lot of overlaps, basically this algorithm, what it will do is, it will map all the middle part to only a small region of the unit sphere. So this Gauss map is our first step in mapping the 3D object to a unit sphere. So this will involve a lot of overlaps, as you can imagine, and I will show a picture as well. So since this middle parts is actually a large amount of the middle part is being overlapped, the algorithm that takes care of harmonic and Tewart mapping, it wasn't able to that effectively reduce the overlap, particularly in the case of submarine. Like for some other basic shapes that we have tried out, it was able to reduce the overlaps, but for the case of submarine, it was finding it very difficult to reduce that overlapping. So the alternate approach we came up with is called a star map, in which we compute the center of that object, and now from the center of that object, we'll be looking at where all the vertices are relative to it, and we'll be normalizing that. So now we'll be having a unit vector pointing in the unit vector which is in the direction of that particular vertex. And this seems to reduce our problem of overlapping considerably well, and the mapping algorithms were able to reduce this overlaps even further. So this was the Gauss map. Yeah.
I didn't understand what you mean by overlap exactly.
Yeah, I'll show you in this picture. So this is the picture I was about to show. So as you can see, uh, the in Gauss map, when you compute the typical Gauss map, whole of the middle region of the submarine is mapped to these small region in the unit sphere. Okay.
Okay.
So this what our subsequent algorithms like Tuet and Harmonic should do is it should try to reduce this overall congestion, and it should try to make a uniform like it should try to split out the panels and make a uniform like a uniform spread of the panels around the sphere. But in the case of our typical Gauss map algorithm, since there were a lot of panels which are in this small region, it wasn't able to effectively remove all the overlaps that we see. But in the case of star map, what happens is the middle region will not be like it will not be mapped to that much small a part of the sphere, but there will be the regions which is towards the end that will be mapped to a very small region. But it our algorithm can our subsequent algorithms will be able to reduce that overlap and come up with a smooth surface, smooth panel. I mean, the panels will be spread out now instead of no overlaps.
Nimish, was that clear?
Yes, sir. Like,
What he's saying is, you see, at the end of the day, you want that entire submarine surface to wrap around a unit search sphere,
yes, yes,
such that there is no overlap of the surface itself on it. So no part of the surface of the submarine should overlap on itself. So there should be no folds.
okay,
And he's trying to minimize that using the harmonic map. So he has not even started with the harmonic map, but what is the starting point of that map? One is Gauss map, which he's taking. The other is star map, and he's saying that the star map is resulting in a better result when the algorithm is applied as compared to the Gauss map.
okay, yeah.
Yeah, so this is not the this is just the initialization of the Tuet map. We'll be seeing how the map changes when we are going through the iterative procedure of the Tuet map.
Okay, okay.
So this sphere that you see is actually of radius 1, but you can see those panels, right? So these are panels which correspond to this submarine. So if you see the surface, there are no overlaps in the panels, right? So similarly, we would like to come up with such a mapping so that there will be no overlap. But when we are computing Gauss map or star map, there will be some overlaps which are expected, but that overlaps should be reduced by the subsequent Tuet map algorithm and the harmonic map algorithm.
I mean, if you think of it in a simple manner, if you put a centroid of that object and you project a ray in the direction of the mast of the submarine, you will see that it will intersect the surface at 3 points. Right?
Yes, sir.
So all the 3 points when he does a star map will map to the same point when he takes the projection on the unit sphere.
Okay, okay.
But he does not want it at the end of it after the harmonic map has been computed.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah. So the next step after computing the Gauss map is we compute something called as absolute derivative for all the vertices. So absolute derivative is nothing but it is represented by the Laplacian of f of v. F is nothing but a function and the normal component of f of v. So in our case, this is just a definition. In our case, this f is nothing but the Tuet map. I mean, we'll be doing it in an iterative procedure, and since the Tuet map is now initialized with the Gauss map, we'll be using whatever the value that the Tuet map has to compute the absolute derivative. So what does Laplacian means? So Laplacian is again derived given by another equation, which actually to give a sense of how this equation is, like if you are considering, if you are seeing a vertex, then you look at the surrounding vertices which are adjacent to it, and you try to get a difference amount of how much that particular vertex is from the current vertex that you are seeing upon. And in the case of this a similar process we will be doing for harmonic map as well. So in this current case, the definition for absolute derivative there is also the same. And in this particular case of third map, the coefficient that you see here is 1. In harmonic map, it will be differing. So what basically does is, when we are iterating through the algorithm, so we will be updating our toward map based on this absolute derivative and the learning rate that you saw before. I mean, we'll give it as a step length. So we'll multiply that step length and the absolute derivative to update all the vertices. So this is where the algorithm tries to smooth out the overlaps. So when the algorithm successfully takes out the overlaps, this d of the absolute derivative will be very small, and you won't see much difference. And this is when we'll be stopping the iterative procedure as well. So this is what sort of was talking in the before slide. And to get a sense of where to stop, we will be the Toward energy. Toward energy is nothing but it's given by this equation. So here also KUV 1. So you will be taking the norm of f of u minus f of e, and in this is nothing but the Toward map values. So you can consider the Toward map as nothing but the coordinates of the vertices. So what we are what we are doing here is we are basically subtracting the coordinates of the map that we currently have, and we sum them over it. For each vertex we will be doing that. So
Manoranjan, here K represents the mesh, right? Or one panel of the mesh, I guess.
Yeah, K represents basically they have meant something called a simplical complex in which they have all the panels.
Correct. So this here, in this case, since it's a triangular mesh, will represent one triangular panel.
Correct.
And you're taking two vertices at a time and doing this summation over it, where you want to see where the mapped position of both vertices are, difference between them is not, multiplied by this coefficient, and you add them up to give a sense of what that energy is.
Correct, sir. Yeah.
And then you do this process over all the triangular panels and then add them up, then that becomes your Tewett energy. Correct?
Yes, sir. Correct. So I actually meant this KUV. I'm if I have told wrongly. So here KUV is 1. So that's what I meant.
Correct. Okay.
Yeah. So when we want to stop the iteration, the change in this energy will be very small, which means that the algorithm has smoothened the overlaps, and our map is in a better condition than what we started with, the Gauss map. So I have a picture of the Toward map as well. So so the energy difference that I was talking about, in our case, it particularly we have to keep it as low as 10 to the power minus 6, because it was requiring if there was any threshold which was before that, then it was not able to remove all the overlaps. So from the Gauss map and the Toward map, you can see a difference, I hope. So now you can see how the panels are well separated, and the part that you saw here, this is actually the sail of the submarine. So this part is actually mapped here, so that you can see it. And here are after the Toward map was successfully able to smoothen them out, and this part actually represents the sail now. So maybe in this image it might not look very clear, but there are no overlaps here, and that was tested as well. So the panels here are so small, that's it. So all the panels that you have in the toward map now are almost are actually doesn't have many overlaps. So when we initialize this toward map with the harmonic map, and again we'll be doing a iteration over there as well. So that harmonic map algorithm will be able to converge more faster, and it will make some small changes only, because this toward map itself was, if it is very good, it will not do any change at all in some cases. So if there is a need for if there is a need for change, then it will the harmonic map will further smoothen them out. So when we are looking at the algorithm for the harmonic mapping, so this is the step 2 of what the paper has suggested. So we'll be giving the toward map that we computed in the previous algorithm, the step length, which means the same here as well, and the energy difference threshold, and the now we will be having a proper output of the harmonic. So here, as I said before, we'll be initializing the harmonic map with the toward map. Then we compute some the harmonic energy. Harmonic energy here actually goes with the same formula as this, but the KUV that we are using will be different here. So the KUV is given by this formula. So to give a sense of it, like when we are looking at this particular say these are two triangular panels and the angle is alpha and beta. So this KUV will try to give an overall representation considering these beta and alpha, which will be computed through these algorithms. So it will be not for this triangular panel that you see here, we will be computing A, V1, V2, these all three values. And similarly, we'll be computing these three values for this triangular panel as well. And when we are trying to compute the KUV for this particular edge, what we'll be doing is we'll be adding coefficients of the corresponding angles. So to give a sense of what is happening is it will be trying to you know, it will be to conserve the angles of the panels in this way. So whatever so as I have said, the conformal mappings, so if two lines are intersecting in the original mesh at alpha, it in the original object at angle alpha, it will be the same in harmonic mapping as well. So this KUV will be trying to uh, it will be trying to conserve that. So that's what we are doing here. So when we are computing the absolute derivative here, similar based in the previous formula for computing Laplacian that was in the absolute derivative, we will be multiplying with KUV, right? So this KUV will be again given by this particular formula that we have. And after we have updated the harmonic map based on the absolute derivative, we compute the center of mass of that corresponding harmonic map in the particular iteration, and we update the harmonic map based on that center of mass. Center of mass is nothing but like we'll be trying to compute the areas of the panels now, and we'll make sure that the center of mass lies in the center. We are actually doing that so there is some concepts called as Mobius transformation. So to make it unique for a particular object, when we are seeing, the harmonic map should be unique. So to do that, we will be updating this as well. And finally, we'll be computing the harmonic energy, and it's actually similar to what we are doing in the toward mapping as well. So the final harmonic map is given by this picture. So the toward map and harmonic map, like since the toward map is almost equal to the what we wanted, harmonic map will converge faster, and there will in this case there wasn't much difference when you are seeing it visually. So yeah. explaining.
Was that clear for everybody what the harmonic map is doing compared to what the other thing was doing?
I'm not sure how well I've explained. It was a bit complex. So if there are any questions, please let me know.
Yes. Either everybody has got it or nobody has got it. Which one is it?
So the math is a little complex.
Correct. I think what he's trying to do, in a sense, is, the mathematics of it is a little complex, but think of it in this manner. If I walk 10 kilometers into the east and then 10 kilometers to the north, and then again 10 kilometers back to the, towards my left. So each time I'm making a turn to my left. And if I'm on a sphere, that will complete it into a triangle if the radius of the sphere is 10. Get my point? If I'm looking at a sphere, okay, and I'm moving from the equator a distance of 10 kilometers, another 10 kilometers, I reach the pole, and then again another 10 kilometers, I come back to the equator. Yes, no, it's not making sense?
So that is when you're working on a spherical
Sphere.
surface. Yeah.
Correct, right? So, but then how does that map to the angles? How do you preserve the angles which are on a 3D Euclidean space? How do you preserve them on a spherical surface? That is what this formulation is essentially helping you achieve. It's ensuring that the angles of intersection of the mesh, they remain the same even after you map them onto the spherical surface. It's preserving the angular intersections while trying to map or kind of project the entire surface onto a unit sphere. That's what, in essence, it's trying to do. You can think of this as if, like, if I have a lemon and I cut it open and I squeeze it out, I can't spread that lemon flat on the surface, correct?
Yes, sir.
That is what is called as a definition of non-developable surface. So now we are trying to say that we have some surface which we want to map to a domain which is non-developable, or we want to map it onto a sphere. So you can't directly just place it on it, but you have to do some stretching or you have to do some straining of the surface in order for it to match on the sphere.
Yes, sir.
That is what this harmonic mapping is helping you achieve.
Okay.
Sir, here only angles are conserved.
Yes, you're going to try to conserve the angles as much as you can.
And this is an iterative algorithm with a threshold on this energy.
Correct. So he's trying to say that at every time step of, or every step length of where he's trying to modify the surface, he doesn't want that energy to be lower than 10 power minus 6.
Okay, and in these steps, where exactly is it conserving the angles? Which part is conserving the angles?
The formulation of using these different vector dot products and cross products in the computation of the energy which you are trying to minimize is helping you conserve the angles.
Okay, and this A, V1, V2 is the harmonic energy.
This is the,
What is A, V1, V2?
these are the K values, if I'm not wrong. The
Yeah,
K,
so for
Why are they K?
sorry?
Why are they named A? Is it K, UV?
no. So basically, for each, so for conserving, for computing KUV for each of the edges, what we'll be doing is we'll be trying to compute this value for the opposite angles in the two panels that it is part of, and then we'll be adding this together to have the value of KUV. So
Okay.
if you take this panel, so V1, V2, V3 basically represent each of the three vertices in this triangle, in this panel.
Yeah.
So you'll
Okay.
be computing this for all the angles that you see here. But this KUV will be part of two panels. So this edge that you see here will, whatever edge you take, it will always be a part of two panels. So the opposite for the
Okay.
opposite angle,
Okay. Okay.
you calculate the coefficient and you add them. That's it.
So you have to keep track of where all the
Yeah,
angles are. Okay.
correct,
Okay.
correct. So that was a difficult problem here. So implementing algorithm was really challenging.
Okay.
Okay, all right. I think Manoranjan, you can proceed further unless there are any questions.
Yeah, it's a bit difficult to get an overall idea, but maybe like see the panels here, right? So you can see how they are when we are starting with the algorithm. You can see how the panels are. So they are intersecting. They are not even though they lie on the circle, it's not proper. But when at the toward map, you can see how they are organized well. And this harmonic map will try to modify the toward map such that we'll be conserving the angles as well. So that now what happens is we are ready to actually compute the shape descriptors from this harmonic map. So now what we are now having is we have mapped a 3D object onto a unit sphere, and since the angles everything are conserved for panels, it indirectly gives a way. It indirectly saves the shape information in this. So we will now be heading towards the algorithm which can compute the shape descriptors from this harmonic map. After the shape descriptor computation of shape descriptors, now we are in a position to say that okay, so here is a given shape, so that particular shape will have this particular feature vector. So it's kind of that. So I'll be moving over to how we compute the shape descriptor. So okay, before that, for the same submarine you saw, if you have a different orientation, then we'll have a different shape descriptor for that according to this algorithm. So what we have to do, we have to come up with ways in which we can make it rotation itself. So what I mean is, so if we are given any submarine which are oriented in any direction, still it should represent the same feature vector. So, what we are what we are trying to do is we sample the harmonic sphere into latitudes and longitude. So this sphere will now be sampled across different points, which represents theta comma phi, which is represented by theta comma phi. And so to give it a to explain it better, so all these points that you see here will be mapped to a corresponding point in the original object. So whatever number of vertices the original object has, that much only here also in this in the sphere you will be having. So ideally, this particular point may represent some point in the submarine. So for example, the part where the sail is mapped to, so this some of the points here will represent some of particular points in the harmonics in the original object. So it in the Cartesian coordinate system, it will be x, y, and it will be represented by x, y, z of the original object. So here, when we are trying to sample, each theta comma phi will now have a definite x, y, z values in the original mesh. So in the original object. So what we'll be trying to achieve is we'll be using each of the x, y, z separately as a shape function and calculate the spherical harmonic coefficients, or in other words, the Fourier coefficients. So I have the formula for this as well. So this f is nothing but the value of x, y, and z in the original object. So we'll be having, so f represent x or y or z. So we'll be having 3 equations in total, and ylm is nothing but the spherical harmonics. So if you remember, we should have done in one of the differential equation courses, we should have come across this. So ylm theta of phi is defined as by this formula. So ylm, L is L. So for each L, we'll be having 2 L plus 1 M values. So it kind of gives those. And for each of, we can choose L here. And depending upon how we choose, we can model the shape accordingly. So if we choose a less value of L, the shape that we can identify will be very less. If we choose a more value of L, then we'll have a better representation of the shape, but now there will be more computations. So so when we are looking at, when we are sampling it as a grid, the problem is now we know whatever values of this definite vertex to the original shape. So we have to keep a track of that as well. So when you're looking at, when you're sampling them, some of the points may come in the middle of the panel as well. So to do that, we have to interpolate. So what happened was, when I was trying to use standard interpolation algorithm from SciPy, it wasn't able to uh, effectively interpolate these. And so what we did was, we came up with a custom interpolation algorithm, which actually what it does is, when we are considering a theta comma phi value, it will first determine which panel it is a part of. So that it will do by, like, we will be computing the plane of each of the edges of a particular panel, and we will be taking a dot product of that point under consideration with the normal of the panels. So so it should all be either positive or negative, depending upon how the normals of the planes are oriented. And based upon that, we can conclude that that particular point under consideration is inside a panel. And after that, once we decide which panel it is in, we'll be using concepts from spherical triangles. And what we'll do is, we'll be trying to compute the area that the point and the other vertex in the triangle make, to come up with a weight value, which can kind of signify what the x, y, z of the corresponding theta comma phi means in the original 3D object. So once we have that, we are all set to compute the Fourier coefficients, or in this case, the or we call it as spherical harmonic coefficients. So we compute those, and as I said before, we have to make them rotation invariant. So this coefficient will be different for different orientation, even for the same object. To make it rotation invariant, what the paper suggests is, we have to sum up over all the spherical harmonic coefficients that we get across m values, and for each of the functions that we had. So I said we'll have x, y, and z values, 3 equations here separately, right? So we'll be adding that as well. So finally, what this rotation invariant shape descriptors will have, this will be representing by a shape descriptor of length L. So as I said, we can choose this size of L, and if the size if L is small, the shape, the shape properties that it can define will be less, and if L is large, we can have a more better understanding of the shape. So finally, now after this process, we actually were able to represent a given 3D object by a feature vector. But there was a major problem here. So, as I said before, the aim of the project was to reconstruct from the rotation invariant shape descriptor. But
Manoranjan, I think we will take a small break here because I think some of your audience might be losing you. Okay, how many people are not able to follow?
yeah, it will be difficult to.
It is. It's a hard problem to explain in one go, but nevertheless, I just want to see how many of your friends are able to follow right now.
Sure, I'm not able to follow.
They're not able to follow. Okay, think of this as a very simply put. If I have a time history of, say, some aspect, so suppose I want to measure the roll motion of a ship, okay? And I measure the roll time history. I have at discrete times, which are not necessarily evenly spaced. I know what the value of the roll is. Then I know all the information about the signal, correct?
Yeah.
But there is a different way to represent that as well. And that would be if I take a Fourier transform of that time signal, and then I represent at different frequencies, what is the energy level which is there in different frequencies. I know I have basically compressed that data set, isn't it? Instead of having the data points at all the different times, I've compressed it to knowing at a few set of frequencies. If I know the energy, I can reconstruct the signal. Okay, so now what has happened is I have essentially said that as long as I know that, okay, and my region of interest is between say 2 to 20 seconds, because that is where the significant waves are, as long as I have a good enough understanding of what frequencies, what energies are there, I have a good chance of recreating what my original signal looks like. Now, if you look at Manoranjan's problem, it kind of has a parallel to this. The point being that you can get the entire geometry of the ship if you know all the vertices of the mesh. If you know the XYZ coordinates of all the points, you essentially know the geometry. But in order to detect a geometry from afar, okay, you need to have a methodology in which you can reduce this information of, rather than having to identify say 2000 points of mesh coordinates, can I reduce that number to some smaller number, or can I represent the same information of that geometry in a different format so that I can only predict those small things which will so-called form a feature vector for me, instead of having to try to find out 3000 different coordinates.
Okay, got it.
Is that making sense?
Yeah, it's making sense.
So that is what in essence he's trying to do. He wants to distill the geometry described by say the 2000 points in his mesh into a fewer set of coordinates that he can use for prediction. And they need to be shape invariant or rotation invariant in the sense that whether the ship is oriented from the right to the left or left to the right, it still represents the same ship. So no matter which direction it is rotated in, the orientation of the ship should not change the geometric characteristics of the ship. So that is why he's talking all about these rotation invariant descriptors.
Okay.
Okay, is that making sense for everybody else too? Or is it anybody else having stuck somewhere? I think now is the time to ask questions so that we can clarify those now, and then he can move ahead.
Yeah, I can explain again as well.
The map is invariant, not invariant.
The map is not invariant. You see, because if I start off with the ship to the right, let's say the bow of the submarine to the right, and I compute the harmonic map, versus when the bow of the ship is to the left and I compute the harmonic map, I need not necessarily end up with the same harmonic map.
Can you rotate the map to?
Yes, but I do not know that how much by which I have to rotate. In reality, I don't know where the ship is and in what orientation it is. correct? So I need to have a descriptor which is invariant of its orientation.
Okay.
So if, say, for example, if you're looking at the problem which he was talking about, one of the papers, there is a shape and there is a flow past it and you're measuring the things behind it. Can you go to that picture, Manoranjan?
Yes.
And you are able to create the map from measuring those currents, the temporal difference of those currents.
Sorry, come again?
You are able to recreate the map just using temporal difference of those currents.
Correct. Here it is only looking at a spatial difference. I think here this is not a temporal difference.
Here it's only a spatial difference.
So the idea here is that that shape, that peer type of shape which you have, how can I describe it minimalistically? I can have a lot of points on the surface or on the edge of that peer shaped thing to discretize it. Then I have 1,000 different coordinates which I have to identify. Instead, if I want to identify it using lesser number of points, I have to have some discretization of it, or I have to kind of distill that geometry into a fewer number of parameters which I can try to predict. But now imagine here that in one case, the ship was pointing to the left, and the other case, the ship was pointing to the right. The geometry is still the same, although its orientation is different. Is that making sense?
Yeah, so the flow patterns would also be different, but the descriptor would be able to see it as the same shape.
Correct. You have to train the model to see the same shape, even though the flow patterns are different here.
And here is a 2D one, but we are trying to get a 3D.
Yeah, 3D.
Correct. So here it is a 2D model. There we are going to extend it to 3D. Okay, is that making sense for everybody?
Yes, sir. Also, Manoranjan, like I had another query. Like in one of the papers in this figure only, you said something like temporal signatures. Like,
Yeah, correct.
tell what exactly is that?
So what they will be trying to do here is, so they will arrange a series of sensors here. So when we are trying to move the object across this series of sensor, each sensor will like based on the movement of the object across the sensor, the value detected by the sensor will also be varying with time, right? So how those variation, each object will be like the values, the flow that is created will be varying, and so the value will also be varying. So how this is varying will be captured by these sensors, and we try to make an effective sense of how these values change over time, and we try to come up
Yeah,
with
one more
the
question. Does the shape needs to be symmetrical because you're only measuring from one side?
In this case, in this particular research paper, I'm not entirely sure, but they have taken symmetric shapes only. But in the case that we are trying to solve, it need not be symmetric.
No, but I don't think all their shapes are symmetric. One of the shapes
One
is
of the shapes.
Like
Yeah.
otherwise, you would
the
need
lump.
some sensors on both sides.
See, that's why the pressure signature in the forward and the backward will be different here. See, for the sphere, it will look the same. It will just look. So, for example, if you look at what is I think this is the velocity, not the pressure.
This is a velocity, sir. They will be measuring velocity here.
Okay, so if you look at the first line for forward motion and backward motion, so the column number 1 and column number 3 will be simply inverse of each other, because it's a uniform sphere which is symmetric in nature. Whereas the moment you come to the last one, that so-called submarine kind of a thingy, you'll see that the signature will not be the same in the forward and the backward motion.
And is that information enough to recreate
It is It is not known, because this problem only looked at classification. It really did not look at shape reconstruction.
and we are trying to reconstruct the shape.
We are trying to reconstruct the shape. So yes, so
So,
the problem we have.
So, for Manoranjan, do you think we need sensors on both sides or just one line?
Yes, in fact, we will be using, because initially what we'll be doing, or what Manoranjan will be doing, is rather than test this on an experimental setup to begin with, he'll test it on a numerical setup where you can get the pressures and velocities at any point that you want.
Okay, okay.
And once he has a sufficient confidence that this method will work, then only, if possible, we'll go to experiments. And it possibly may not be in his scope to do the experiment.
Okay, in the numerical simulation, we'll be using all the information available.
Correct.
Manoranjan, I still didn't get like what does temporal signature signify? Like, is it the signal that we get over here, the green or the
Yeah,
pink
that
signal?
is the.
So
it's
what does that
based-
signify?
Yeah, so this tells how the velocity that is detected by the sensor changes over time.
Oh, so it's the velocity of the fluid.
Yeah.
Okay.
So temporal basically means whatever is changing with time. So if you look back at his previous research paper, that was looking at the steady problem, in the sense that the distance between the object and where you are measuring the pressure was not changing. So it was looking at a steady problem, as long as viscous effects are neglected, of course. But here the problem is that the point at which you are measuring is moving relative to the object.
Okay.
So that's why this is called the so-called temporal. So which will, in essence, the problem is still steady as long as you're moving at a constant speed. But the idea is that the measurement point is moving with respect to the body. So you're not really having a constant pressure signal, but you're having a time varying pressure signal from which you want to try to classify the shape.
Okay.
Good. More questions?
I also do not understand the flow. So first you take the measurements, then what do you do next? You construct the map or discretize the construct the map? I mean,
Which one? Question?
like how will the program flow? I do not understand which comes first,
Do
the
ask for
map making or
one that
the
we
descriptors.
that I'm working upon, huh? Not this current paper.
No, I think he's asking about your program flow.
Yeah, right. So in this, yeah. So first we'll be calculating the mapping and the shape descriptors. So now we kind of have a representation
For the
of
map,
how.
you already know what the object is.
Yeah, we'll be doing it for several objects.
Especially in the training phase, Ashwin, we will know what the object is.
Yeah.
Okay, then what do you do?
Yeah, go ahead, Manoranjan.
Yes. So after computing the shape descriptors, like I mean, now we'll have, so consider it as a case of image classification. So what you try to do is we'll be trying to compute. We'll be having different feature vectors for different types of images, right? So similarly, we'll be trying to have a different type of shape descriptors for different objects. Now that we have this, what we then do is we'll be trying to compute the flow, I mean the pressure and velocity points, that pressure and velocity values that the particular object can that the particular object creates when it is moving, and we use those data to build an ANN such that it takes those values and it can predict the shape descriptors. So different object will create different flow across it, and thus the velocity and pressure will be different. So based upon that, our neural network should be able to predict the shape descriptors.
Okay, so during training, you know the map, you know the flow data, and you're trying to make the shape descriptor. And during testing, using the shape descriptor and flow data, you'll be predicting the map.
Yeah.
Okay, so Manoranjan, like, is it that like we would be requiring
So
a
once we
huge
know-
data in order to predict the shape predictors? Because just say we do this, like we train the data for one particular type of a shape, like we have the velocity and the pressure around that obstacle, and we know what the obstacle is. Like, will it like, do we need a huge data for it? Because there are various types of objects that can be made, right? It's not that we have one type of object. And also, like, can the neural network be able to predict multiple objects simultaneously? Just say we have two submarines approaching each other, and we want to predict both the submarines one at a time. So do we require huge data for training, or just a little data on each object would be fine? Because there can be various possibilities, right? So one submarine can move at a 45-degree angle and another submarine can move at 180-degree angle. There are other possibilities as well.
True. I think he is frozen somehow. Manoranjan, are you there? Yeah, I think he had a net issue. He'll reconnect. But the primary idea there, Shrenik, is that yes, multiple object detection is a much harder problem. And what will happen or what we can predict when multiple objects are there is not clear yet. First of all, even for one object detection itself will be quite a challenge. The moment your prediction point or measurement point is far away from the object, you can't really discretize the entire shape of the object. You probably can only say that what is the geometric size of the object. You can probably say that it lies within a sphere of so and so radius, but you probably will not be able to give more details. But if your measurement point is closer to that geometry, which is flow past the geometry, you may be able to glean a little bit more information on being able to get the prediction right. In terms of some of the local features also, you should be able to predict.
Okay, got it.
So the shape descriptor is a Fourier on the map.
The shape descriptor is essentially a Fourier. It is a Fourier transform. You can think of it as a Fourier transform applied on the sphere after it has been mapped to a unit sphere.
What exactly will that do?
It will basically tell you that it is, no matter how I rotate the sphere upside down or downside up, the descriptor will remain the same. So it is as if I take a time history and I take a Fourier transform of it, I know that there is so and so energy at that particular location. Now it is a question of phase which will change how my signal looks like. So if I take the phase out of the information, then I know that this much energy is there in that frequency. Whether it be a cosine wave or whether it be a sine wave, I'm not really bothered.
Okay, and you're doing classification based on this energy.
Based on the coefficients which you obtain by taking the Fourier transform.
And how many coefficients will you get?
So that is what he's going to describe. So you progressively get more and more number of coefficients in a triangular pattern. So the first coefficient will be a single coefficient. At the next level, you will get 3 coefficients. At that next level, you'll get 5 coefficients, so on and so forth. And the beauty of this process is the larger the order of the coefficient, the smaller or the local features are what are getting affected. So you really don't need.
So you do not need that much higher curve.
Correct. So that is the primary idea behind this sort of a signature detection, that you want to describe the shape in such a manner that transcendentally or progressively, as you would add more and more number of coefficients, the changes are only local. Okay?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Can someone get in touch with Manoranjan?
Yes, sir, I did. He's having some network issues. He said he'll join within 5 minutes.
Okay. All right. Let's give him a couple of minutes.
So I also have one more query. Are there any publications or papers which have already built this artificial neural network on object detection, or like is it a new topic?
It's a brand new topic. Especially for 3D objects, there isn't any.
Okay. So for 2D there are, right?
For the 2D, that is what Manoranjan has been showing you, those 2 papers which he has shown you. There are many more in that format which are looking at 2D shapes. But unfortunately, for the 3D, there is no good way. And the reason for that is for the 2D, there is a neat way to represent the this cascadingly representing the geometry of the surface in a cascadingly set of coefficients which are progressively only contributing to local features is well established for 2D surfaces in terms of what are called Laurent series. Whereas for 3D objects, it is much more involved, and that is where he has been facing the challenge in trying to figure out a scheme in which you can represent an object in a set of coefficients progressively such that they are only contributing to local features. The primary coefficients will have more information, and the progressive coefficients will have lesser and lesser local information which they'll be adding.
Okay.
Okay, it's unfortunate that he is unable to join.
Sir, so with this shape descriptors, we can recreate the object, right? 3D object, right?
Yes, you can recreate the 3D object using those shape descriptors.
So when we are actually applying this method, we'll be using the pressure data to get this shape vectors first.
Correct.
And then from that, we'll try to get the 3D object.
Correct. So from there, you will try to generate the 3D object.
So will we compare the shape detectors which are calculated with the database which we already have, or will we train a network to create the 3D object, like learn to create a 3D object based on the shape descriptors?
No. We probably will not try to create the 3D object using the neural networks. We'll only try to get the shape descriptors from the neural network and then put the reconstruction process as a separate process.
Okay, so this whatever Manu is doing, it does not include reconstruction.
It will not be
Doing reconstruction.
No, he will do the reconstruction. The ANN will not do the reconstruction. The reconstruction step will be after the ANN has chugged out the or spit out the coefficients.
Okay.
Using those coefficients, he will do the reconstruction, but the neural network will not learn to get the 3D shape directly out. Then the degrees of freedom will be too many, and it will not be so easy to train.
So like, what is the method for getting the 3D shape? Will it compare with the already existing shapes, or will just learn to create a shape from what it is?
No, because you know when you're training the input geometries shape descriptors, you already know, you can calculate them. You will be trying to minimize, your neural network will be trying to optimize your outputs in such a way that it can give out the shape descriptors correctly. And using those shape descriptors, you will then recreate the geometry.
Oh, like,
did that answer your question? Maybe not.
Recreating this geometry, is it like just a mathematical process, or?
It's a mathematical process.
Okay. So
just as you went from the geometry to the coefficients, you have to retrace your steps in a sense to get the geometry back.
Okay.
All right.
Sorry, sir, there was a network issue.
No problem. Any other questions before he can proceed further? I think we might want to wrap up soon, Manoranjan.
Yes, yeah. Can you see my screen, sir?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Yeah, Nimish, to your question on how we reconstruct, so once we know these coefficients, right, so it's just a mathematical procedure of multiplying it with the spherical harmonics and getting the function back, which in this case is XYZ. That's it. So I was discussing about what was the major problem in the method we saw. So what happened was, like, when we are trying to convert it into rotation invariant descriptors, we actually like destroy the information of these coefficients separately. So when you are trying to square them and add, you don't know what the individual coefficients are, right? So even though we can represent it with a descriptor, it might not be involved in recomputing the shape. So what were the alternative methods that we tried out was one of the works of Hang Dang Lee and Richard Hartley. So they were also their paper is on conformal spherical representation of 3D genus zero meshes. So what their basic idea was to rotate the object to a canonical orientation, which means a definite orientation, and then use those coefficients to represent the object directly. So in that, so what they tried to do was, like, after we compute the harmonic maps, getting the after we got those coefficients, we basically try to rotate that coefficients. So it's possible to rotate those coefficients, and we transform it to a space where the values of each of the shape will be the same. So no matter how the orientation is, no matter what the particular harmonic map of an object is, so we'll be getting a the same shape descriptor when we rotate it to a canonical orientation versus screen, and the angle by which we need to rotate is given by that algorithm. So he is given by the algorithm that he has suggested. So I didn't go deep into that. So but we were able to replicate those and those that was suggested in the paper. So the idea is, like, it's just like a rotation matrix. So we just make a computer rotation matrix and multiply it with that coefficients we computed, and this angle by which we rotate is determined by the algorithm that is suggested. But what was observed was we were not able to see any changes when we were trying to, like, the problem arose when we were trying to experiment with this rotation matrix itself. So when we give a particular alpha, beta, gamma, the orientation was never seemed to change, and basically it was difficult to understand what was going on behind that algorithm. So meanwhile, I was also looking at another method. So the idea here is to rotate the object before computing the harmonic map itself. So what if we can say we are giving an input of whatever object in a different orientation? What if we can rotate that particular object to a for the same object? What if we can rotate it to a canonical orientation that he has suggested before, similar to that? So this will happen for the original body itself and not the coefficients that we have computed. So looking at that, so I was able to find a research paper on efficient 3D shape matching and retrieval using a concrete radialized spherical projection representation. And in this paper, they have introduced something called CPCA, which means a continuous principal component. So what they do here is whatever that they suggest is on the original object, original 3D object. So they first translate the object. So if the object that we have is translated apart from the origin, so around the origin, if it's not in the origin, so we first translate it to the center of mass of that object. So basically we making it translation invariant as well in this case. And to make it rotationally invariant, the object, now what we are achieving here is whatever orientation the object is in, we will be bringing it to a specific orientation based on this algorithm. So first we then compute the covariance matrix of the 3D object, and we use those. So all these they gave it as a formula for in that paper. So and based on that covariance matrix, we compute the eigenvectors, and that we use it as a rotation matrix to multiply with all the panels. And we should also make it reflection invariant, because what happens is, like, I have a picture here. So this was what I was talking about. So no matter how the orientation of this is the original orientation of the 3D object. So no matter what this orientation is, this algorithm can bring it back to this orientation. And and there is a chance that for this particular object only, this orientation is being brought upon. So for different object, different kind of orientations may come. But what this algorithm does is, for the same set of objects, no matter how it is translationally or rotationally differently oriented, it tries to bring back to this orientation. So this is currently under testing. So this was the last progress that was made, and so this has to be tested well before we can come up with conclusions about how it's.
Here is where even I was thinking, and I know that you've been looking at the CPCA quite a bit. The rotation will not be the same depending on the type of the object.
Yes, sir. So the rotation may not be the same. Yeah.
So instead of a submarine, if I had a ship, and if I rotated it using CPCA, it will not necessarily go through the same angle, or the final projected angle or the projected view will not necessarily be the same isometric view which I see.
According to my understanding, it may be the same. Yes.
Correct. So then that does create a problem for us, isn't it?
Yeah, when we are actually the domain that body is surrounded with may cause a problem here.
Not only that, it will also cause a problem with respect to how your neural. See, if everything transforms into the same view,
yeah,
then we know that okay, the neural network is standardizedly looking to put the object in that view and then compute the coefficients. But that's not the case here. There is some sort of the CPCA, what I'm afraid of is it relies on the geometry of the object, or it depends on the original geometry in order to find its canonical orientation.
Yes, sir. So that's what it is, correct.
Right? And that's not a algorithmic view of it, but rather a data view of it, in the sense that it depends on the data points rather than on an algorithmic way of coming to a canonical orientation.
Right.
Right? Whereas the other approach, which the Lee and Hartley paper was looking at, it was more of a algorithmic view of bringing it to a canonical orientation.
Yes.
Right?
But I was not sure whether they are bringing it to the same view or it might be different.
It doesn't matter. See, as long as it doesn't depend on the data points, as long as it doesn't depend on the mesh points directly, I don't bother about it. Because
the thing is, there also we'll be computing this alpha, beta, gamma based on the shape coefficient. So we'll be trying to reduce one of the shape coefficient to some value, and whatever alpha or beta, gamma that we get based on how we are trying to eliminate those coefficients. So if doesn't it indirectly reflect how the shape has to be?
No, it indirectly depends on the data points. It doesn't directly depend, and there is a difference between the two. See, as long as alpha, beta, and gamma depend on the shape descriptors or the so-called Fourier coefficients that you're obtaining, that is something I will believe that your neural network can learn. Okay, whereas it cannot learn if it depends on the data. Because in your inverse problem, you don't know how the body's mesh looks like.
Correct.
So I would prefer if this process can be streamlined. I understand that the other process has helped us at least make some progress with respect to understanding how the canonical orientation turns out. But I would really like to see if this process can work out better.
Got it, sir. Yeah.
Because I think this approach can be learned by a neural network, whereas the other one is very difficult because the data is not there. You don't have the mesh information when you're trying to predict the canonical orientation.
Yes, sir. Got it.
But here you have the shape information in the shape coefficients. From that, if you can get the canonical orientation, it is definitely much better.
Okay, sir.
That was the only thing which was probably weighing on my head since our last couple of meetings, but I was not able to get it out to you. So
Yes.
today I am able to do that. Okay.
Yeah, so then we have to go back to this particular method. which we are
Probably,
stuck
that's
at.
what I feel, because you will not be able to learn. If it depends on the mesh information, there is a problem. It will cause us, the method will fail. Basically, you need it's as if it's like a circular referencing. I need X to get Y, but I need Y to get X. That should not happen. And in some sense, that is happening with the CPCA.
Got it.
Okay. Anything else, or that was the last slide?
So what has to be done, that's it with this. I'm done, sir.
Yeah. Go ahead. Finish it off.
Yeah. So what is further pending in the project is, so this particular part where we have to compute the shape descriptors is still a big problem, and so that part was specifically very challenging, and it's still going on. So once we have that, so what we can do next, what is pending next is we have to estimate the data from theory to get the pressure and velocity of a moving object. And we are also looking at ways we are looking at whether we have to compute the grid in the harmonic map separately and get those points using interpolation. Instead of that, if we can directly compute those using those original values, original vertices, if we can directly use that, then how does it affect the shape coefficient? That is also pending. And then, so once we get the theory, use the theory to get velocity or pressure points of a moving object, we are then we are then left to build the output as the shape descriptor. And once we get the output as once we get the shape descriptor, we have to teach the object from there. So how the neural network is able to learn these, this problem of computing shape descriptors is still pending, and it will be covered in the coming months. That's all. Thank you, everyone.
Excellent presentation. So what I'll do is I will now leave for the others to first ask a few questions, and then I'll come in at the end.
Yes, sir.
Yes, others who, please feel free to ask questions about the process, especially since the part he came back. If something is not clear, please ask him to go through that, so that I want to see that everybody is on the page and everybody is able to ask questions.
So I hope the methods, is there any problem with the methods that we are using to compute the shape descriptors?
Mano,
Yeah.
I have one doubt there. Like this, why this? I don't understand why the orientation matters when you're getting the what harmonic that part.
Okay, so orientation changes the harmonic map. Huh?
Yeah, like it is
Okay.
a complete 3D object that you're taking, that entire 3D surface, and then mapping it onto a sphere.
Yeah. So, but the say if it has a, so for this particular orientation that I showed before, this was the harmonic map. So you can take it like this. So the 3D object will be represented in Cartesian coordinates, right? So it will have X, Y, and Z. So when we are trying to map it to the harmonic sphere, when it has a different orientation, it is not necessary that the same point that was in the mesh that was differently oriented may come back to the same point in the harmonic sphere.
Okay, so basically, multiple harmonic mappings are possible for a same 3D object.
If it is in different orientation, yeah. Okay,
so
you can come up with you can actually see this when you are initializing with the star map itself. So what we are doing with the star map, we are trying to compute the vertex normal, right? So from the center of the body. So when we are doing that, if the object is differently oriented, the way in which the point will be initialized in this star map itself will be different because the unit normal itself is different.
Okay. So, and when you're trying to make it like rotation invariant, you are trying to like set a defined orientation for a given body and then trying to get the object in that.
Correct.
Okay.
That's what I'm currently trying to work upon.
Okay. So, like, is it possible that like okay, so basically you have a reference orientation that you want to get, right? So we can fix that as the global coordinate system, and then you have present orientation, like whatever orientation you have, and you want to get the orientation to the reference orientation.
Yeah, the definite orientation that I mean that canonical or that we call it as canonical orientation. So, but that may not be, that cannot be predefined for the objects. So that has to be algorithmically computed. That's what we were talking as well. So this method CPCA that I worked upon, that does what it does is it converts the object to a prescribed orientation even before computing the harmonic map. So what it ideally does is it based upon the geometry, it comes to a specific rotation. But what Sir told we were more interested in was to like based upon the coefficients that we get, that will represent a particular object in a particular orientation. So say if we want for a particular object to convert it into canonical orientation, why not we use those coefficients directly and compute that? So it indirectly will depend upon the shape, but it can be algorithmically computed and it can be learned by the neural network.
Okay, like canonical orientation, is it?
A canonical orientation is some orientation that all the objects of a particular type can go on to, so that we can compute the shape descriptors. So in this case itself, you see, so the orientation is different for the original object, but we convert it into a fixed orientation, right? So something like that is what we want.
So
because
how do you decide this orientation? How do you decide
so that is where we are stuck at as well. So we have to come by a way in which define this orientation. Like there are algorithms that do that, but there was I didn't understand it particularly well. That part is still a problem here.
Okay, so that orientation should come up.
So we have to go to that orientation and then compute the shape descriptors.
Yeah, but like I'm telling, how will you fix that like reference or canonical orientation?
Yeah, so that has to be.
If I give you a shape, this should be its canonical orientation. Will that depend on the shape of the object?
That indirectly will depend upon the shape of the. So for the same coefficient, I mean for the same object for different orientation, the coefficients that we get will be different.
Yeah.
Right. So we try to come up with we try to apply an algorithm on that coefficients that we get, so that all the coefficients of a particular object can be rotated to a specific frame. So that is given under in this research paper basically. So in this research paper that I talked upon. So they are actually rotating the coefficients based upon alpha beta. And this alpha beta gamma will be varying for different orientations of that object, and that will be computed to give you a sense. So we will be trying to achieve like say that 4 to 5 coefficients. We try to fix what the first, second, and third.
Can you repeat?
Yeah. So say we have 5 coefficients, 5 shape descriptors, the length of the shape descriptor. So we get this alpha, beta, gamma that we want by trying to fix the first 3 coefficients, for example, and try to compute what should alpha, beta, gamma be, and then use that alpha, beta, gamma to rotate to that coefficient that we have fixed. For all the others, for all the different objects, different things for the same object. This part is particularly being explored. Yeah. So,
okay, I think let me give one try, Manoranjan.
yes, sir.
Although I'm not sure whether I'll be successful too, but let me give it a shot anyway. So Nimesh, what he wants to do is, starting from some orientation, he will get some coefficients, correct?
Yeah.
But then he wants to kind of standardize that orientation so that the descriptors are shape invariant.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, no matter how the object is oriented, whenever we measure the pressure signals, we need to, our neural network should be able to say that, okay, I don't care about the orientation of the object, but the orientation will change the flow.
Yeah.
But the changed flow, it should be able to read in and still be able to give me the original shape of the object.
Yeah.
Right? So at the end of the day, what it wants to do is, it is not concerned, or it kind of needs a way to represent the object where it is invariant to rotations.
Okay. Yeah.
So now, if I start my object off in different initial orientations, I find that the coefficients that I obtain are not unique.
Okay.
Right? So is there a way that after I have gotten the coefficients, can I transform them by some way in order that they are all going to be invariant, is the question that he is trying to answer.
Okay.
Sir, this invariance thing worked for 2D in the previous paper.
Sorry, come again?
This rotational invariance and they tried it in the paper and it worked.
In the paper and it worked? Which one?
Work?
You mean this part that I am telling you for this paper, conformal spherical representation?
Yes.
Yeah, they claim it's working.
They claim that it is working, but
For 3D.
Yeah.
For 3D, correct. For 3D objects, they claim that it is working. But Manoranjan has been having some trouble with the algorithm. So I think we need some more reading probably, and probably a little more understanding of what exactly they are doing in order to get to that canonical orientation.
Okay.
Okay, so the idea primarily is that once we get the coefficients, starting from some initial orientation, we want to rotate the coefficients such that let's say that we want to get one of those coefficients to be 0. That will be our so-called canonical orientation, from which we will be trying to predict the shape. So no matter which pressures I measure, I'll always try to predict the orientation in this particular format, such that one of those descriptors is 0, for example. Say I have 5.
So that would mean you're training the algorithm on different orientations.
Sorry, come again?
That would mean that you're training the algorithm on different orientations for the same object.
Correct. So the idea is that it should be able to look at pressures when the object is in different orientations and still be able to map to the same shape descriptors. Which it
Yeah, but what if two objects in two different orientations produce the same data?
Two different objects in
different orientations will produce the same pressure flow.
yes, and then there will be a problem, but that's highly unlikely because given the way of the fluid flow, highly unlikely.
Okay.
But yes, your question is valid that if I have so instead of a submarine, I have, let's say, some other basic shape, which gives me the same pressure values, then I am in trouble. Yes, you're right, but that's very unlikely.
The barge
Sorry, come again?
would do that, right? Because it is what do you say, cuboid.
Huh?
It would give the same in two different orientations. It would give the same pressure variation.
Unless until the geometry is square.
Also, how are you making sure that you're only using the orientation information by taking the Fourier transform?
Sorry, come again. I didn't hear the question. Come again.
You're taking the Fourier transform, right? And you need to only use the orientation information.
I need to take a Fourier transform and then I want to convert those coefficients into a specific orientation.
Okay. So that is the problem.
That is the problem, correct.
Well, you can't just use the orientation information itself and just take the rest.
There is no way to separate the two out so easily. That seems to be the issue primarily. It is kind of entwined within the coefficients. The orientation is entwined.
Okay. So the Fourier doesn't exactly separate that out. Okay.
Yes, it doesn't give an explicit separation between orientation and the geometry.
Okay. What if you take Fourier twice or thrice enough times, really separate it out?
Fourier of the Fourier, huh?
Yeah. And this.
But then, I don't know, it depends. But particularly in this particular case, once you get the coefficients, there is no way to take another Fourier
Yeah,
space.
because when you take Fourier transform, you are not using information, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so you can take it as many times as you want until stuff separates out. I'm not sure.
No, this would mean as if I have a time signal and I take a Fourier transform, I get the frequency domain. I take a Fourier transform of the frequency domain signal. How would that be useful, or what would it physically mean?
I'm assuming that it should be encoded in some higher feature space, and we are trying to reach that feature space by taking it into interference.
I am not quite sure that will be quite intuitive to understand.
Oh yeah, I'm just throwing stuff out. I'm not sure.
I agree, and that's good that you are throwing stuff out so that we can see if something works. But here it seems that there is no intuitive understanding of what that coefficient will come out. And I'm not quite sure actually you can take a spherical harmonic coefficients of the spherical harmonic coefficients. I don't even know what that will mean like. Because they lie on a sphere, right? Once you've taken the coefficients, those coefficients don't necessarily lie on a unit sphere.
Yes, okay.
But yeah, that's it. We still have to think about how to solve this problem, right, Manoranjan?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. But I think the answer does lie in somewhere in that Hartley's paper.
Yeah.
We just have to figure out. I don't think it is that hard. We just have to figure out how they are applying the rotations. Some of the math we have to understand there. That's all. Easier said than done.
So in a canonical orientation, certain spherical coefficients, they would be zero. The shape distribution. Or
no, I just gave you an example of one being zero. It doesn't necessarily do it that way. It's
so something like that. So it will be such that you'll have a certain pattern in that in particular orientation, and from whatever data you get, you'll try to get into that pattern.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And would this pattern again depend on the shape, or will it be independent of the shape?
It will implicitly depend on the shape. I don't want it to be explicitly depending on the shape. So what Manoranjan showed you with that CPCA, it explicitly depends on the shape, in the sense that it really depends on where the mesh points are, and it is doing a PCA analysis, a principal component analysis, in order to try to find out what is the orientation in which I'll get the maximum along the minimum number of eigenfunctions.
Okay.
But I don't want it to be based on data. I want it rather to be based on the coefficients that we have got, so that that can be algorithmically learned by my ANN, which otherwise will not be possible if it depends directly on the data.
Yeah, okay.
Because I don't know where the mesh points originally are in the test case scenario.
Is it possible to train another ANN just for the rotation?
Yeah, I mean, I think here the point is we don't need a sledgehammer to put a nail to the wall. We probably need a hammer to do it.
Yeah.
In some sense. Okay. All right. Other questions for Manoranjan? Rohit, Sanjeev, no questions?
Yeah, Manu, so you were talking about the CPCA method and the other method. What exactly is the difference, since both of them need the shape descriptors to be derived?
No, I mean in CPCA, like what we are doing is we are trying to rotate the object even before computing the spherical harmonic coefficients. That's what we are doing in CPCA. But in the other method that we are discussing now, that doesn't that actually computes the canonical orientation after we are getting the coefficients, and then we are determining the rotation to be done.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Is there any other questions?
I'll just be back in 1 minute. Rohit and others who, Shrinik, if you have any questions, please go ahead. I'll just be back in a minute.
Yes.
So the main idea here is you have to find the orientation first of all.
Yes.
Right.
We have to find the orientation. So in that paper, what we are seeing here, that would have been done in some other way, indirectly, which considers the shape. But in CPCA, we are directly considering the shape of the object and determining this orientation. Ideally, what we want is something like this only, but it need not depend upon the geometry of the shape directly. It's what Sar's conclusion was.
So, like, defining the orientation for a given object should not depend on the geometry.
Yes. It shouldn't involve direct dependency, but it can involve indirect dependency using that shape descriptors.
So while testing, CPCA could run into problems because you don't have the shape directly available. Is that it?
Not shape. I mean, it doesn't. So when we are do it, the neural network may not be able to relate the pressure points of different orientation to this orientation. So in effect, we are computing the shape descriptors in this orientation through CPCA, but when we are actually seeing the pressure points or velocity points measured from a different orientation, the neural network may not be able to learn. Not entirely sure, but it was Sar's suggestion. Yeah. May not be able to learn.
So neural network can only give the shape descriptors for object it has already seen or similar objects.
That depends upon how we are training it. So if we are able to, if there is an object which is in the same shape, as you said, similar shape, then it will be able to detect. But very unknown shapes, it may not be able to detect. But in the case of But in our case, there may be only a few objects which not, I wouldn't say few, but the shapes of the objects may almost be similar, right?
Yeah.
So we'll be getting, if we are training it properly, we should be able to differentiate among those objects.
Okay. So like if it is a different shape, then the error would be high. That's it. Okay.
Yeah. So that's why we have to we have to train with a large number of objects that are probably going to come under our sensor systems, and we should try to train the neural network.
All right, I'm back.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? Can we all switch on our videos? I'm still not seeing everybody. There they are. Okay, so sounds good. If you have any more questions which you want to take offline, I will be happy to connect with him. I know he's your friend, so just give him a ring and buzz him a little bit more. Okay, there's nothing wrong with it. But what I'll do is I'll stop the recording for now. Stop.